Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Frugal Noodle, the podcast dedicated to helping you understand finance, money, and retirement, early or otherwise. And in today's episode, helping you understand how self-sufficiency can actually lead to financial independence sooner. Now, of course, as a disclaimer, this is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor, simply sharing information as I learn. So you want to be financially independent, but you have something in the way of achieving that? Habits that you just can't cut out. Daily coffee at the old Bucks. You know, that's a food or beverage expense costing between $75 and $150 a month if it's daily. Going to the movies every weekend, that's an entertainment expense costing between $60 and over $200 a month, depending on the number of people and if you're buying snacks. Relying too much on others for your needs? Do you need to tap into that credit card to make ends meet between paychecks, which is obviously pushing you further into the debt hole that you find yourself in? Your current lease on your car is running up, but because you spent so much on it, you're not going to have enough to buy the next car, so you're on your way to another lease. Or maybe you're spending too much on groceries. You've got divine taste or dietary needs, or maybe you're eating out way too much. Perhaps you're already aware of it, but being as self-sufficient as you can is the easiest way to eliminate more reasons that you are financially dependent. I feel my family has been an example, we've gone down a decent road to self-sufficiency to where we are today. And ours may be more extreme than what most can or are willing to manage, but it certainly gets more extreme than where we are. And we're aiming to get deeper into that lifestyle of self-sufficiency. But baby steps got us here, got us to where we are today. And if you're interested in being more self-sufficient to any extent, then baby steps will get you to where you want to be as well. And if you've been listening to the show long enough, you know by now that finance is not the only subject covered here. Lately, it's been kind of the nuance of what's covered here. But you also know that the subject matter of each episode ties back into finance in one way or another. So as we set down another Frugal Noodle extrapolation on the episode subject, bear in mind that I will bring it back into finance by the end. So let's first start on the history of our human experience and the history on self-sufficiency. First of all, why are we a species that went from being completely self-sufficient to where we are today, where we were once able to satisfy our needs in 15 to 20 hours a week, but we now spend 40 to 80 hours a week for our livelihoods today? That statistic on 15 to 20 hours a week is based on a study by Richard Borsche Lee, which detailed the subsistence lifestyle of hunter-gatherers from mankind's primitive days. Some would argue, well, we've come so far to not live so primitively, and that's the blessing of our society today. And to an extent, I agree. But can we be so black and white on the benefits of progress? Progress is a must, but we've deviated from a society of targeting our needs through our work to a society of capitalist commerce, which has turned 15 to 20 hours a week of work for our needs to what feels like a majority of our waking hours spent to satisfy needs and immense wants. And that's beyond our working hours. That's also our driving time and everything that's dedicated to setting up our day to work. It begs the question, is all progress really good? Or maybe the question should be, is everything that we've called progress really progress? So at what point did we deviate from our primal ancestors and begin devoting more time to work? Well, of course, we have a timeline to go through. Over 12,000 years ago, we see the first signs of commerce, trading cattle essentially as the currency of the age. Cattle were used as a store of value, just like money in your bank account or paper cash, but cattle had been seen as food, bearing offspring, meat, and milk. You can buy a gallon of milk with a few dollars today, but you can't milk your money now, can you? Around 10,000 BC is when we also began dabbling and mastering agriculture, a truly amazing breakthrough in our time as a species. We learned to control nature in a way that would almost guarantee us food at a pretty reliable rate when compared to foraging in the wild. In the millennia leading up to 1200 BC, there are signs of trading precious metals like gold, silver, and copper, and even cowrie shells. So leading up to 10,000 BC, we went from hunter-gathering to an agriculture species, to a trading species where we used physical objects offering nothing beyond the intrinsic value we placed on them. It was through this form of trade that we splintered off from satisfying the needs of our tribes to mastering an area of commerce that others were willing to trade for. Think about it like this. If your tribal unit broke down into two halves, where one mastered the rearing of cattle and the other mastered the growing of some crop like corn, then you could barter between the two of you. But then you discover another tribe that has mastered raising sheep and yet another tribe that grows rice, but they don't necessarily want your corn or cattle. Then into play comes something that won't spoil and can be traded further down the road. Precious metals in those cowrie shells worked well for this because they don't go rancid or need slaughtering. Fast forward through the ages of actual currency with face value, the forming of marketplaces, the introduction of paper currency in 800 AD, and the influences that European exploration has played on our modern lives. There was the form of the modern corporation in the 1600s and on. The first recognized corporation was the East India Company, or EIC. This was an English endeavor that saw the spice trade as well as a number of other products out of India as an opportunity to bring a market to other countries that wasn't there before. And this formation of a corporation was the catalyst into global trade beyond what the world had already known, beyond the world had ever known. It led us down the path of the immense global commerce we see ourselves partaking in every day today. It essentially connected our species in a way we never were and allowed us to, as a whole, to acknowledge that, yes, there are so many things and ways we can satisfy our needs with in the given biome we find ourselves in. But imagine if you could spruce up your life with spices, silk, cotton, and wonderful dyes that could show your social status. Admittedly, by 1600, we were already well beyond the idea of satisfying our needs through our own means, but it was the development of the corporation that taught us to want more and more. So we've got the development of the modern corporation, and nations split off and become masters at developing the resources that their region offers into product to anchor their place in the global market of trade. Then we find ourselves springing into the 1900s, where the development of credit cards and the internet and this digital/information age we are faring in today. Basically, as I see it, which my view is worth nothing, but currency, corporation, and trade has taught us that you don't need to worry about how your needs are going to be satisfied because someone out there is willing to provide them as long as you're willing to pay for them. And our society has been slowly steeped in this mindset for centuries, where this last century alone was full-on waterboarded us with the notion. You don't need to get your hands dirty in the soil, just get them dirty on the assembly line or any other number of places that you can get your hands dirty for other people's wants and your own wants and needs. So applying this today, what is the point of this history? Well, it should be obvious, but my point is that we went from a species of needs alone to a species of wants sprinkled atop our needs. Should we regress back to a primitive state of existence and forage for berries and hunt with spears and deadfalls? I mean, if you're really asking, I'm down, but no, that's not what I'm suggesting. My point is that we were once fully capable of providing for ourselves, and that capability is still in all of us. It's just a matter of how much you want to implement in your life. So back to the scenarios described at the beginning of the episode. Habits. They don't need to be cut out, but you can rely on yourself to satisfy them just fine. With buying Starbucks daily, the answer is obvious. Brew your own coffee at home, and you're going to save a bunch of money, possibly over $100 a month. Entertainment is fine, but weekly movie trips are, well, they're fine too if it's what you really want to spend your time and money on. But there are so many affordable ways to entertain yourself, some that are even free. Use that Netflix subscription, or as I'm sure you've seen, a lot of movies in theaters can be rented from home now. It's a little costly, but if you wait, then it'll be the price of renting other movies at home. We have Netflix, but we took it a step further in our house and now rely on our library for entertainment. Mostly books, But they do have a movie section with a lot of the newer movies that have come out. So we only spend about 3 or 4 hours a week in front of our TV as it is. It's just an easy way to fill in without spending extra money. And how does this all tie back into self-sufficiency equaling financial independence sooner? Well, if you no longer spend $150 a month on Starbucks or $200 a month on movies, then that's $350 you no longer need your employer to provide through your laborious hours. If our ancestors were satisfied with their needs being met, then maybe they never would have broken down in being jacks of all trades and masters of none, and instead mastered one thing that they can sell for those tasty spices they can't grow themselves. Well, then they could have avoided the toiling in the fields that wouldn't satisfy everything they needed and been free of their dependence on that work. That is to say, if they were okay with satisfying their needs on their own and not wanting more, then they could have avoided mastery of individual things that people are willing to buy and trade for. Does it make sense? I hope it makes sense. Maybe you recognize your reliance on others for your needs, like using the credit card to make it to the next paycheck, which makes it so you're not only relying on your employer's compensation for your labor, but also your bank's heartfelt lending. Oh, so heartfelt. I've talked about debt in previous episodes, so I'm not going to get into it here by much. And of course, I want more of those sweet, sweet downloads of my other episodes. But in short, you got to evaluate your means and how high you're living above them. Or there's that lease that's running up and you know you'll be upside down, that another lease is the only option. I'd buy a dirt cheap beater if it were me until I got that upside down debt out of my life before saving up for a car that I can buy outright. Again, discussed in another episode. But the point here is that living through lease after lease is an endless cycle of relying on employment to compensate you for your labor and time for you to be able to afford that lease and the next one. Are groceries too expensive for you? If it's because of your divine taste, you got to remember your ancestors getting sucked into that spice business that got them into trade in the first place. But seriously, we are a family that takes what's in our food very seriously in our household. And for that reason, we buy organic, free range, grass fed, etc. But we also do not buy processed snacks and pre-made foods in general. So our meat bill, our dairy and produce bill, they may be more pricey, but we have almost no cabinet staples and no snacks to spend money on. This is more a health choice than it is a frugal choice. And again, it isn't as cheap as it could be if we lowered our standards. But our groceries are more affordable than people that buy all the boxed and frozen meals that are already prepared, which I would say is a pretty important point in the timeline that I should have mentioned earlier. The fast food and TV dinners of the 50s and the canned everything of the early 1900s really shoved our ancestral beginnings down the tube, chute, or some other cylindrical depository. Eating out as opposed to making your own food is simple enough to explain. You spend so much more money on dining out on subpar food quality than you would if you had just shopped for your own ingredients and learned to cook for yourself. Every time you spend $20 on a meal that would have cost you $6 to make yourself, you're acquiring $14 of your labor that your employer compensated you for to pay for someone else's employer to compensate them to make your meal. That's where self-sufficiency went, folks. I mastered bagging groceries so I could pay you who mastered flipping burgers, so you could pay him or her for mastering assembling vehicles and an assembly line so he and she could pay. Do you get it now? That's where self-sufficiency went. It was all of us mastering an individual thing so we could pay and trade with each other for other things that were mastered, rather than we all just satisfied our own needs. So I keep using my family as an example. So where my family is at today, I've talked about how we have been learning skills that our ancestors knew from millennia ago, because these are skills in self-sufficiency that will actually translate to financial independence, as well as a wealth of other positive outcomes. We're practicing agriculture and our gardening. About 90% of our produce today is only from our garden. We haven't bought more than an avocado and strawberries in our past 4 grocery trips. We've been raising egg-laying chickens for years now and have only bought maybe 4 or 5 dozen eggs over those years. We've also begun raising our own meat birds, which is admittedly a much harder thing than raising egg birds, but not as difficult as your mind might make it out to be. We also mend our own clothes rather than replace them with one little thing that happens to them. We do a lot of our own home improvement. My wife has taken her skill of being an artist and turned it into a business. That means she is not dependent on employment anymore. And there are a number of other things that we've done, but I'm not here to list them out as a brag. I'm sharing them because I want an idea of where we are today on our road to self-sufficiency, financial independence, and early retirement so that you have an idea of the baby steps it took to get there. We didn't happen upon a rural home that had chickens and a garden and all the other things we wanted or needed to make it a reality. It took time. It took devotion and learning each of the skills individually. And we're still learning them, and we will always be learning them. We're nowhere near masters of any of them. But if you're ever to get better at anything, the first place to start is just starting. So imagine what your life of self-sufficiency looks like. Are you going to be a hunter-gatherer lifting logs in the woods, looking for mushrooms and hunting mammoths? Or maybe you're just wanting to master a handful of recipes that get you through each week, so you no longer need to rely on that burrito joint up the road. All I'm saying is that your ancestors did everything for themselves at a point in history, and you're capable of doing more for yourself and not relying on your employment to be able to afford every individual want or need you have at present. Here's a baby step for you to start with. Find a snack or two that you buy daily or weekly and look up a recipe for that snack. Find the raw ingredients and turn it into a thing you do for yourself weekly. You'll motivate yourself to find more things you can replace with your own self-sufficiency that you've had locked in you this whole time. And then you'll discover that you're only relying on employment because of the way your labor translates into compensation to buy things you were fully capable of providing for yourself in the first place. And I'll emphasize that employment is necessary in our society because we are not self-sufficient in every way we need to be. And property costs money, housing costs money, utilities and food, etc. I know. I'm not saying we should abandon the workplace and jump in our loincloths. I'm just saying that we can alleviate how much employment we need and for whatever length of time we need it to get away from that life sooner through retirement, earlier or otherwise. But thank you for listening to this episode. I appreciate each and every one of you who have listened this long to the podcast. I've had a couple messages come through and emails. If you ever want to email me anything or want me to talk about a subject, my email is frugalnoodlepod@gmail.com. So don't hesitate to reach out to me. I've appreciated the communications that I have received so far. I'm sure I'll appreciate any of those in the future. And thank you for bearing with me on all of my tangents. I do a lot of tangents, and the fact that, you stick them out, I appreciate that. I have fun doing what I'm doing. I make no money doing this. It's all just because I want to inspire others to hopefully get a hold of their financial life, as it were, and maybe, stick it to the man by retiring early. Be sure to follow Frugal Noodle wherever you get podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes, and follow Frugal Noodle wherever you are on social media. The show notes will have some links for you to do both of those. Leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you can leave a review always helps the algorithm in getting me and the show in front of other listeners. And of course, simply sharing the show. That's probably the best way to get more listeners on board. You don't got to be, locked up in the closet afraid of people discovering that you want to retire early. I mean, there's still a lot of people I haven't shared that with, but share the show and then tell them that you're kind of open to the idea, maybe be like, I'm not sure, but thinking about it. And you might find that everyone would love to retire early. The music for this episode was produced by CARBS. There's a link in the show notes for that as well. This is Cody of Frugal Noodle. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next week.